In the sweltering heat of Alabama, 1848, the world turned invisible for those who lived in the shadows of plantation gates. At the edge of the Black Belt, a secret pulsed behind the walls of a sprawling estate in Montgomery County, one that the town's newspapers would never dare to whisper. Here, twin sisters, Miriam and Lillian, were born of a slave woman of remarkable beauty and pale complexion, purchased years earlier for reasons no one in polite society would acknowledge. The sisters were identical in every measure: hair like black silk, skin like burnished ivory, and eyes that mirrored one another with the precision of mirrors facing mirrors. But the estate harbored a darker truth. Between these two women, the plantation's master had positioned a single male slave, Caleb. His loyalty demanded, his freedom denied, his body and mind carefully catalogued like an instrument of science rather than a man. The town had no name for what unfolded behind the estate's high gates. There were whispers among the other slaves, fragmented and careful, about a bond between the sisters that transcended blood, a connection that was dangerous and unspoken, a bond that would soon be tested by desire, power, and survival. Caleb moved among them like a living instrument of control, a man whose compliance was both his curse and the sisters' reluctant advantage. He was young, strong, educated, and entirely bound to the plantation's perverse hierarchy. Yet the sisters, hidden behind doors locked from the outside, discovered a curious authority over him, not as owners, but as co-conspirators in a dangerous negotiation of flesh, secrecy, and survival. It began with glances, a touch of hand in passing, a shared knowledge that no outsider could ever understand. Miriam and Lillian, trained in reading and arithmetic, and schooled in music and French under tutors from the city, found that their father's obsessive control had given them a peculiar advantage, the ability to observe and manipulate without detection. And so, with the plantation as their stage, the twins began a silent game that would entangle them and Caleb in ways the world was not prepared to comprehend. Before we descend further, let this truth enter your mind. Type twice in the comments, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let this phrase anchor the secret within you, and while you do, subscribe and tell us your location, state or city, so that you, too, are recorded in the ledger of those who witness what history tried to erase. The story begins not with Caleb's arrival, but with the first night the twins understood the invisible chains that bound every heartbeat in that house, and the subtle power they could wield over a single, captured man. They were not children anymore, they were inheritors of a dangerous legacy. And tonight, as the moon rises over Montgomery's cotton fields, the first move is about to be made. The following morning, the air in the estate was heavy with the scent of cotton pollen and iron, a smell that seemed to mark every secret the house held. Miriam and Lillian moved through the halls with the precision of predators, synchronized in gesture and thought. Caleb appeared first in the breakfast room, carrying his quiet obedience like armor, unaware that the sisters had already begun to map his habits, his strengths, the tiny fissures in his will that they could exploit. Their eyes met across the table, twin flames of strategy, communicating without a word. Every glance, every tilt of the head was a signal, a language older than speech, cultivated in 2 decades of shared existence and clandestine observation. The sisters had learned early that power in this house was measured not by wealth or title, but by knowledge. They knew where the keys were hidden, which overseer logs contained the punishments, which letters could be intercepted, and how every whisper could be turned into leverage. Caleb, skilled and strong, yet chained by law and fear, was both their tool and their test. He had been placed in the sisters' orbit by a man who believed that control was absolute, that one could engineer desire like a cotton crop. But Miriam and Lillian, inheriting the cunning of their mother and the isolation of their upbringing, discovered quickly that human will could not be catalogued or contained. By midday, Caleb's tasks had been assigned, and he moved with quiet efficiency, unaware of the scrutiny under which he labored. The twins studied him from opposite corners of the room, noting the subtle lines in his expression, the way his shoulders tensed, the manner in which he responded to commands without question, yet betrayed thought beneath his calm exterior. Each observation deepened the dangerous intimacy that was forming, a psychological web spun between them and the man who belonged to neither entirely. At night, the plantation became a stage of shadows and whispers. Behind locked doors, the sisters explored boundaries and desires that the world would condemn. The taboo was a living thing here, and they embraced it, testing both their power and the fragile humanity of the man they shared. Every subtle command, every allowed touch, was a negotiation of trust and domination. They were learning, carefully, deliberately, how to bend circumstance to their will without awakening the scrutiny of outsiders, without alerting the rigid hierarchy that surrounded them. Remember the ritual that anchors truth. Type twice in the comments, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let it solidify in your mind as you follow them further. And as always, subscribe and leave your location, for this tale is one of many shadows, and your witness grants it permanence. The first week passed in a haze of observation, strategy, and subtle domination. By the time the moon hung high over the cotton fields, Miriam and Lillian understood not only Caleb's body but the hidden impulses of his mind. The game had begun, the pieces in motion, and the plantation was no longer merely a home. It was a laboratory, a crucible of forbidden desire, and the first quiet acts of rebellion had already begun. The days grew longer as spring approached, the heat settling into the cotton fields like a suffocating shroud, and the estate seemed to breathe with the hidden rhythms of its dark hierarchy. Miriam and Lillian had discovered that Caleb, despite his outward compliance, carried a mind that observed as keenly as theirs, a subtle resistance hidden beneath obedience. It was a dangerous symmetry, a tension neither fully understood, but both exploited. Every task he performed, every ledger he tallied, became a test of patience, a measure of how much could be guided and how much remained ungovernable. They realized quickly the master had underestimated the intelligence of those he tried to control, and the sisters, inheritors of that cunning, would not repeat his mistake. By the third week, the twins had begun small experiments. Touches brushed over the hand, a whispered word in passing, a lingering gaze that lingered longer than propriety demanded. Caleb responded in kind, subtly, almost imperceptibly, a hesitancy that belied the careful masks they all wore. Each encounter was a negotiation of power, of consent, and of secret desire. In these private moments, the sisters began to understand the true extent of their inheritance. Not the plantation, not the wealth, not the land, but the capacity to bend circumstance and will to shape life itself without interference. Even the estate's other slaves began to notice the strange rhythm developing. Whispers drifted through the quarters how the twins seemed to move in unison, how they watched Caleb with eyes sharper than any overseer could possess, and yet none dared speak openly. Fear and fascination held them both captive. The sisters, aware of their own effect, let it flourish, each glance a subtle assertion, each action a careful demonstration of control. At night, behind locked doors, the space between them and Caleb narrowed further. The twins orchestrated encounters that blurred the line between dominance and intimacy, curiosity and coercion, teaching Caleb the rules even as they tested their own limits. The room became a chamber of suspended morality, a place where law, desire, and survival collided. In those hours, the sisters discovered a perverse equilibrium. By sharing him, they held him, and yet, by holding him, they discovered themselves. And still, the ritual of engagement called, type twice in the comments, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let it embed, let it anchor the shadow that grows with each revelation. Subscribe and comment your location, your witness part of the story now, forever marked. By the fourth week, Caleb's subtle compliance had transformed into quiet anticipation. The sisters had observed, learned, and manipulated, and he unknowingly had become a willing participant in the unfolding design. The stage was set. What began as observation and control was now moving toward consequence, and the dark promise of forbidden desire was about to manifest in a way that would bind all three lives in a web from which none could escape. Night fell over the plantation like a velvet trap, wrapping the main house and the slave quarters in silence that was almost conspiratorial. Miriam and Lillian moved as one, shadows melding with shadows, their footsteps inaudible on the polished floors. Caleb lingered near the doorway, the subtle tension between obedience and curiosity drawing him forward even as instinct warned him to retreat. The sisters had orchestrated this encounter carefully, every gesture, every soft syllable designed to draw him into their orbit, to test the limits of his compliance without revealing the full scope of their intentions. They were experimenting with more than control. They were exploring the dangerous, uncharted terrain of human desire, the forbidden interplay of power and intimacy. For Caleb, the air was electric, charged with subtle commands and whispered suggestions that left him unmoored. Each glance from Miriam mirrored one from Lillian, a reflection that was both comforting and disorienting. He could feel himself being observed from every angle, every thought catalogued in the twins' unspoken ledger. The power dynamics shifted imperceptibly. He was not fully captive, nor fully free. He existed in a liminal space, a narrow corridor defined by the twins' will and the silent rules of this private world. The first brush of skin against skin, subtle and almost accidental, was enough to send a current through the room. The sisters held their composure, watching his reaction, noting every twitch, every catch of breath, every hesitation that betrayed desire restrained by fear. Caleb's eyes widened for the briefest moment, and they knew the balance had shifted. What had begun as a study of obedience had become a dance of psychological entanglement, each move binding them closer together, and each secret act leaving traces that no one outside could perceive. The plantation outside seemed unaware of the storm within. Fields lay sun-drenched, the overseers conducted their rounds, and the other slaves whispered of nothing at all. Yet in these locked rooms, a new hierarchy had emerged, one of subtle dominance, of forbidden knowledge, and of shared complicity. The sisters were no longer merely observers. They were architects of desire, shaping Caleb's responses, molding the boundaries of intimacy according to their will. And now, as the first veil of night deepened, it is time for you to seal this truth within yourself. Type twice in the comments, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let it become part of your consciousness. Subscribe and leave your location, state or city so that you, too, are marked as witness to what history has tried to erase. The first act had begun small and almost imperceptible, but its consequences would ripple outward, transforming not just the lives within the house, but the very nature of power, desire and secrecy on the plantation. In the dim candlelight, the twins and Caleb had stepped across a threshold from which there was no return, and the quiet symphony of forbidden entanglement had begun. Weeks turned into months, and the plantation settled into a deceptive rhythm. To the outside world, Miriam and Lillian were obedient daughters, managing the estate with an efficiency that would have impressed even the most skeptical overseer. But behind the walls of their private chambers, the truth was far more complicated, far more dangerous. Caleb, once merely a silent instrument of labor, had become the axis around which the twins' secret world revolved. Each calculated glance, each small gesture of authority, had drawn him deeper into their orbit until the line between control and desire had blurred entirely. The sisters had discovered a new power, subtle and intoxicating, the ability to bend another will while remaining invisible to those who might judge or punish. The first deliberate touch came one evening when the wind rattled the shutters, sending shadows across the walls. Miriam's hand lingered on Caleb's as he handed her a ledger. A spark ignited in the silence, quiet but undeniable. Lillian mirrored the gesture from across the room, and Caleb froze, caught between hesitation and a growing undeniable attraction. It was an unspoken pact they would share him, just as they had shared everything else in life. And yet the consequences would be far beyond anything the outside world could comprehend. For the twins, it was not merely desire. It was strategy, a solution to the cruel stipulations of inheritance that had defined their lives since birth. The plantation itself seemed to conspire with them. Night after night, the wind whispered through the cotton fields, carrying secrets from the quarters to the main house, as if the earth itself were aware of the clandestine arrangements. The other slaves noticed a change, subtle shifts in the twins' movements, the faintest glow of forbidden authority in their eyes, but fear and awe kept their tongues silent. Miriam and Lillian had learned to manipulate the perception of others, crafting an illusion of decorum while cultivating a private, intense reality that no one could penetrate. As the days passed, the twins' control over Caleb solidified, and the quiet intimacy grew bolder. Yet they were careful. Nothing was left to chance. They recorded everything in hidden journals, noting responses, subtle reactions, and the emergence of desire where there should have been only obedience. It was a meticulous experiment, one that mirrored the cruel precision of their father's own methods, yet this time they were the ones in command. And now, let this knowledge root itself in your mind. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let it bind this forbidden truth within you. By the end of the 5th month, the first undeniable change appeared, an unmistakable sign that the sisters' carefully orchestrated plan was taking hold. Caleb's demeanor shifted, his obedience laced now with anticipation, and the twins knew they had stepped into a realm of consequence that would alter not only their lives, but the fragile balance of desire, power, and secrecy forever. By the 6th month, the estate itself seemed to pulse with a quiet, uneasy anticipation. Miriam and Lillian had perfected their subtle orchestration. Every encounter with Caleb had been calibrated, every reaction observed, every hesitation catalogued. They had moved from tentative touches to deliberate intimacies, each interaction a test of endurance, will, and desire. Caleb, caught in the tension between obedience and instinct, had begun to respond in ways that were both involuntary and revealing, his body betraying the quiet longing he had tried to suppress. The sisters watched, noting every nuance, every flicker of awareness, knowing that the consequences of their manipulations would ripple far beyond the walls of their chambers. It was during one late evening, when the cotton fields were ghostly in the moonlight and the crickets sang in steady rhythm, that Miriam first noticed the subtle change within herself. A faint queasiness, a tenderness that she could not ignore. She confided immediately in Lillian, whose reflection mirrored both concern and calculation. The twins, trained in observation and careful reasoning from birth, understood the meaning immediately. The evidence was undeniable. The first consequence of their shared plan had manifested. They were pregnant. The weight of realization settled in, thrilling and terrifying, for the implications were enormous. Their lives, already bound to Caleb by secrecy and control, now extended into a future that none of them could have predicted. Yet, even in the midst of this revelation, the sisters maintained the precision and secrecy that had defined their existence. They recorded every symptom, every physical change, every subtle shift in their bodies, knowing that the plantation's structure and Caleb's role within it would soon intersect with the new reality forming inside them. Each night became a silent ritual of observation and negotiation, the rhythm of their intimacy measured against the slow, inexorable progression of pregnancy. Caleb, unaware of the full extent of their awareness, remained both participant and subject, the axis around which their plans turned. The plantation outside remained oblivious. Overseers and field hands moved with mechanical precision, the rhythm of labor masking the hidden dramas inside the main house. Only the sisters knew the fragile balance they were maintaining, the danger inherent in their shared secret. And yet the thrill of mastery, the dark knowledge that they had orchestrated this outcome, strengthened their resolve. They were no longer merely daughters or inheritors. They were architects of a forbidden reality. Now, seal this truth within yourself. Type twice in the comments, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Subscribe, leave your location, and let this story embed itself in your consciousness. For what has begun in the shadows of this Alabama plantation is not mere history. It is a lesson in desire, control, and the consequences of forbidden choices. The first month of pregnancy passed with careful observation, silent calculation, and anticipation. And by its end, the sisters knew that the stakes had shifted irreversibly. Caleb was no longer simply a participant. He was entwined in a secret that could consume them all. The months that followed moved like a slow tide, each day pulling the sisters and Caleb deeper into a reality that the world outside could never comprehend. Miriam and Lillian, now fully aware of the pregnancies growing within them, navigated each moment with the precision of seasoned strategists. Their knowledge of the estate, of the routines of the overseers, of the patterns of fear and obedience became their armor. Every interaction with Caleb was now layered with new meaning. A touch, a glance, a whispered word could shift the balance of power, influence desire, and shape the path of their carefully constructed future. They were no longer merely observing. They were orchestrating, guiding the course of life itself. Caleb sensed the change but could not articulate it. Each day, he felt the subtle authority of the sisters tightening around him, a binding force he could neither resist nor fully comprehend. The intimacy they shared, once a tentative experiment in control and obedience, had become a complex network of emotions and unspoken rules. He found himself watching their faces for cues, listening for the slightest change in tone, unaware that every reaction he gave was being catalogued, analyzed, and recorded. He was both participant and instrument, his body and mind intertwined with the twins' intricate design. Outside the chambers, the plantation remained a stage of deceptive normalcy. The enslaved workers carried out their labor, overseers executed orders with mechanical precision, and the fields bloomed in quiet abundance, oblivious to the undercurrents shaping the main house. Yet even here, the subtle influence of the sisters extended outward. Their presence commanded attention, even if unspoken. Whispers of their growing authority began to circulate, though no one could articulate the danger that lurked beneath the veneer of propriety. They were simultaneously part of the system, and apart from it, architects of a secret that no law, no overseer, and no societal expectation could penetrate. At night, in the locked sanctum of their private chambers, the intensity deepened. Miriam and Lillian shared silent conversations, calculating risks, anticipating reactions, and ensuring that their control over Caleb and the unfolding pregnancies remained absolute. They knew the fragile thread on which their future balanced, yet they welcomed the tension, the danger, the intoxicating awareness of power fully realized. And now, witness the truth yourself. Type twice in the comments, "I see what hides behind the gates." I will not look away. Subscribe and leave your location, letting this dark knowledge settle within you, a seed of awareness that will grow with every revelation. By the end of this 7th month, it was clear the private, forbidden world of the main house had irrevocably shifted. Desire, secrecy, and control had merged into a force that could not be undone, and the plantation, once merely land and labor, was now a crucible of transformation, shaping lives in ways history would never record. Spring waned into early summer, and the plantation pulsed with a quiet tension that no outsider could perceive. Miriam and Lillian moved among the workers and overseers with a calm efficiency that belied the storm within the main house. The pregnancies, now undeniable to themselves, remained hidden from the world, a secret as fragile as spun glass, ready to shatter if mismanaged. Yet this concealment became another layer of power. Every glance exchanged between the sisters, every subtle command to Caleb reinforced their dominance while masking the truth. The estate was a stage, and the twins were both performers and directors, orchestrating each gesture to maintain control and prevent discovery. Caleb, increasingly entangled in their design, began to anticipate the sisters' wishes without prompt. He moved with precision, executing tasks that went far beyond instruction, the subtle authority of Miriam and Lillian guiding him as much as explicit orders. Each time he touched their hands or glanced into their eyes, a silent negotiation occurred, a dialogue neither could fully voice but both understood. The line between obedience and desire had blurred, and in that blur, the sisters found both pleasure and strategy. By controlling the perception of intimacy, they controlled the man entirely. Even the plantation workers sensed the shift, though they could not explain it. Whispers circulated, the twins moved with an unnatural confidence, their control of the estate almost preternatural. Yet no one dared challenge them. Fear, respect, and the invisible web of secrecy kept all within bounds. The sisters had learned the lesson their father had tried to teach them: control could be cultivated quietly, invisibly, with observation and subtle influence more powerful than overt force. And now, as the heat of summer pressed against the plantation, it is time for you to participate in the ritual of truth. Type twice in the comments, "I see what hides behind the gates." I will not look away. Let it anchor the darkness you are about to witness. Subscribe, leave your location, and claim your role as a witness to this hidden history, for your awareness binds the story to the present. By mid-June, the first outward signs of change were apparent, subtle yet undeniable. Miriam's steps carried a slight caution, Lillian's hands lingered on her own body in moments of reflection, and Caleb's gaze shifted, caught between wonder and fear. The sisters had become architects of both secrecy and consequence. The web they had woven around Caleb, themselves, and the plantation had tightened. The stage was set for escalation. In the shadows of the main house, they were no longer merely daughters, nor merely inheritors. They were orchestrators of life, desire, and a forbidden legacy whose consequences would ripple far beyond the cotton fields. Summer heat thickened the air across the plantation, hanging over the cotton fields like a veil of oppression. Inside the main house, Miriam and Lillian moved with the calm precision of predators, each step measured, each gesture a calculated signal to Caleb. The twins had grown attuned to the subtlest cues, a shift in his eyes, a hesitation in his hands, a quickened heartbeat beneath their watchful gaze. They understood now that control was more than authority, it was an intimate choreography, a quiet dominance that could bend thought, shape desire, and direct consequence without a single overt command. Caleb had become an instrument of their design, his every instinct unwittingly aligned with their intentions. The pregnancies were no longer whispers of possibility, they had begun to assert themselves. Miriam felt the first undeniable physical swell, the subtle shift in her form mirrored in Lillian's body, a dual confirmation that the plan was unfolding precisely as they intended. Every night, the twins recorded changes in secret journals, noting the progression of the pregnancies, the patterns of Caleb's attention, and the ways in which his obedience and desire intertwined. The meticulous care mirrored the cold calculation of their father's own breeding experiments, yet now it was wielded with conscious purpose, rather than cruel ideology. Caleb, increasingly aware of the profound intimacy he shared with both sisters, moved cautiously yet eagerly, a paradox of compliance and instinct. He sensed the gravity of what had been orchestrated, yet could not fully comprehend the extent of their design. Each encounter reinforced his entanglement, weaving a web of desire, obligation, and secrecy that no one outside the house could perceive. The sisters' power had become absolute in these private spaces, and they relished the slow, methodical expansion of their dominion. Outside the plantation remained a facade of normalcy. Overseers maintained their routines, field hands labored, and the rhythms of life appeared unbroken. Yet subtle signals, slight changes in how the twins moved through the rooms, how they issued instructions to Caleb, began to ripple outward. Fear, respect, and admiration intertwined in ways that left others uncertain, unable to articulate the precise source of unease. The twins had learned their father's most potent lesson: power need not be flaunted to be absolute. Type twice in the comments now, I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away. Subscribe and leave your location. Claim your witness to a secret that defies convention, one that reshapes desire, control, and the boundaries of morality. By the end of this 9th month of subtle domination, the first irreversible transformations were evident. The pregnancies had begun to alter not only the sisters' bodies, but the equilibrium of power itself. Caleb's role, once merely functional, now encompassed secrecy, complicity, and the subtle coercion of consent. The plantation had become a crucible where desire, manipulation, and consequence merged into a single, inevitable force, and nothing within the estate or beyond would ever be the same. The heat of midsummer pressed against the walls of the main house, heavy and unrelenting, mirroring the tension that had settled into every room. Miriam and Lillian had grown adept at managing Caleb's presence, his movements synchronized almost instinctively with their desires, their unspoken rules, and the hidden rhythms of the estate. Yet even mastery demanded vigilance. Rumors of scrutiny from distant relatives and neighbors occasionally drifted through the county like faint, menacing echoes. The sisters knew that one misstep could unravel the careful web they had woven. One whisper, one observation, one stray glance could expose the forbidden reality growing inside them. The pregnancies, now undeniable to themselves and increasingly apparent in their forms, had transformed every gesture into a statement of intent. Caleb's attentiveness was no longer a simple reflection of their authority. It had become a lifeline, a conduit through which they orchestrated secrecy, desire, and obedience. His every word, every action, subtly reinforced the twins' control, binding him as surely as their shared secret bound them together. Outside, the plantation maintained its semblance of normalcy, the overseers performing their duties, the fields alive with labor. Yet every corner of the estate had been subtly restructured around the twins' careful management of perception. Each evening, in the dim candlelight of the sisters' private chambers, strategy became ritual. Every recorded observation of Caleb's reactions, every note on the progression of the pregnancies, and every consideration of the plantation's operations was catalogued with meticulous precision. The sisters knew they were no longer mere daughters or inheritors. They were architects of life and secrecy, their dominion extending beyond control into the intimate governance of desire and consequence. The weight of their design pressed against them, a mix of exhilaration and danger as they anticipated each ripple of influence across the estate. And now, let this truth take root within your own consciousness. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates." I will not look away. Allow the awareness of this hidden world to embed itself, transforming perception and understanding. By the 10th month, the first irreversible confrontation loomed. A distant cousin, visiting under the guise of estate oversight, brought subtle questions and scrutiny that threatened to pierce the veil of secrecy. Miriam and Lillian, fully aware of the stakes, maneuvered with icy precision, concealing not only their pregnancies but the depth of their power. Caleb, entangled in both desire and duty, became a shield and participant, his very presence enforcing the illusion of normalcy. In these moments, it was clear the plantation had become a theater of control, desire, and forbidden legacy, and the world beyond its gates would never fully understand what had transpired within. The summer sun had begun its slow decline toward autumn, yet the air inside the main house remained thick with anticipation. Miriam and Lillian moved through their days with deliberate purpose, their bodies now carrying undeniable proof of Caleb's entanglement with them, a proof they concealed behind the carefully tailored dresses of a plantation mistress. Every step, every glance, every whispered instruction was calculated to preserve their secret while deepening their control. Caleb's presence had become both shield and instrument. He anticipated their needs, mirrored their subtle signals, and executed the unspoken commands that kept the estate functioning seamlessly. In this quiet orchestration, the twins had reached a level of mastery that even their father might have admired and feared. Yet control demanded vigilance. Even subtle changes in the behavior of the enslaved workers could ripple outward, threatening exposure. The twins monitored everything: the arrangement of cabins, the routines of labor, the slight shift in a field hand's expression. Nothing escaped their attention. Every movement, every hesitation became a signal, a piece of a complex puzzle that ensured their secret remained buried. They recorded their observations meticulously, each note a testament to the precision of their orchestration, each entry a reflection of their growing dominion over life, desire, and consequence. Caleb, increasingly aware of his own role, began to act not merely in obedience but in cautious anticipation of the sisters' desires. He navigated the delicate balance between secrecy and participation, unsure whether his actions were voluntary or compelled by the twins' subtle influence. Every interaction reinforced the unspoken hierarchy, Miriam and Lillian at the center, orchestrating outcomes with precision, Caleb both participant and observer, caught in the gravity of their design. Outside the main house, the plantation seemed unchanged. Overseers maintained their routines, the fields thrummed with the rhythm of labor, and the world beyond the estate remained unaware of the intimate calculus unfolding behind closed doors. Yet every detail had been touched by the sisters' influence, from the arrangement of harvest schedules to the subtle manipulation of merchants visiting Hanville. The twins had transformed their inheritance into a living experiment, one that defied social norms, moral boundaries, and the very notion of control. Now, let the knowledge settle within you. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let this truth anchor itself in your mind, binding you to the forbidden reality you witness. By the end of this 11th month, the first social consequence of the pregnancies began to surface. Glances lingered longer, whispers brushed against the edges of perception, and the delicate balance of secrecy began to strain. Every action the sisters took now carried the weight of potential exposure, and yet, within that pressure, their mastery of manipulation and control grew sharper, more intoxicating, more absolute. The stage was set for confrontation, revelation, and the next chapter of their forbidden dominion. By late summer, the invisible threads that had bound Miriam, Lillian, and Caleb into a delicate, dangerous triangle had tightened almost to breaking. The pregnancies could no longer be hidden from subtle observation. The slight swell of the twins' bodies, the careful adjustment of their clothing, and the measured way they navigated the plantation all spoke of a truth that Caleb could no longer ignore. He found himself watching more closely, noting the rhythm of their movements, the moments when a hand brushed against a swelling stomach, the quiet deliberation with which they avoided being seen together. Each observation drew him deeper into the sisters' control, entwining him further in the web they had woven with surgical precision. Miriam and Lillian, ever vigilant, recognized the shift immediately. Caleb's increased attentiveness was both a threat and an opportunity. His awareness could betray them, yet it also provided a tool, a man fully enmeshed in their designs, invested in secrecy and unknowingly compelled to enforce it. Every glance, every touch, every subtle command became a calculated maneuver to reinforce their dominance, while simultaneously ensuring the continuance of the facade. The plantation outside remained unremarkable, a picture of order and routine, yet beneath the surface, currents of desire, secrecy, and power flowed unchecked. The sisters' meticulous documentation of symptoms, interactions, and behavioral patterns had become a private codex of power. Each entry recorded not only the physical progression of their pregnancies, but the psychological manipulations that shaped Caleb's obedience. They studied his responses, noting hesitations, inclinations, and flashes of understanding, weaving them into strategies that ensured their secret remained inviolate. Every day became a lesson in observation, calculation, and the subtle assertion of authority, each decision reinforcing their role as architects of a forbidden reality. And now, it is time for you to participate in the ritual of recognition. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let the gravity of this hidden world settle within your mind, imprinting the awareness of power, secrecy, and consequence. As autumn approached, the tension reached its apex. Caleb's internal struggle, caught between fascination, fear, and compulsion, mirrored the precarious balance the sisters maintained daily. Each movement, each interaction carried the weight of discovery. The main house had become a crucible of intimate control, secrecy, and power, where every glance, every whisper, and every decision had the potential to reshape the lives of all involved. Within this crucible, the forbidden legacy of the Alabama twins expanded, unstoppable and absolute, altering the very fabric of the plantation they had inherited. As autumn deepened, the plantation became a landscape of carefully concealed truths. Miriam and Lillian had perfected the art of outward normalcy, while their private world surged with forbidden complexity. The pregnancies had progressed to the point where every movement required thought, every gesture measured to avoid suspicion. Caleb, fully ensnared in their design, became an extension of their will, carrying out tasks that ensured secrecy while reinforcing their subtle domination. The air in the main house vibrated with unspoken rules, invisible to outsiders but absolute within its walls. The sisters' influence had begun to ripple outward. Overseers now followed instructions with greater precision. Domestic staff executed tasks with an almost imperceptible tension, and even field workers felt the unspoken command radiating from the main house. Miriam and Lillian had learned to manipulate not only people but perception itself. A glance here, a carefully placed word there, a subtle gesture that guided behavior without overt authority. The estate had become their laboratory, a living experiment where secrecy, control, and desire intersected. Caleb, once merely a participant in the sisters' plan, now carried the weight of enforcement, his very presence shaping the compliance of all who lived under their roof. Yet even within this carefully constructed order, danger lurked. A merchant visiting from Hanville had begun asking pointed questions about labor output and field schedules, subtle probes that threatened to pierce the veil of secrecy. Miriam and Lillian recognized the risk immediately, responding with a combination of charm, intimidation, and careful misdirection. Every encounter became a test of their ability to manipulate reality, to maintain the illusion of normalcy while preserving their hidden dominion. Caleb, attuned to their moods and commands, acted as both buffer and instrument, ensuring that every outsider remained unaware of the truths they concealed. And now, as this story embeds itself in your mind, participate in the ritual. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let the weight of hidden knowledge anchor itself, binding you to the secrets that shape desire, obedience, and control. By the 13th month of the twins' orchestration, the plantation had transformed into a theater of influence. Every gaze, every conversation, every action became a piece of a grand design where secrecy and power intertwined. Miriam and Lillian, masters of observation and manipulation, had elevated their control to near perfection, ensuring that no event, no question, no curiosity could unravel the carefully maintained web. The forbidden legacy continued to grow, silent but absolute, shaping not only their lives but the very soul of Bell River Plantation. By late autumn, the plantation had become a stage upon which the twins' intricate design unfolded with terrifying precision. Miriam and Lillian navigated every corner of Bell River as if the house itself were an extension of their will, every room, hallway, and doorway a canvas for control. Caleb moved alongside them like a shadow, anticipating commands before they were spoken, his awareness of the pregnancies now fully entwined with his role as protector, participant, and silent enforcer. The physical changes in the sisters' bodies had begun to demand adjustments, hidden shifts in posture, deliberate alterations in routine. But every modification was calculated to preserve secrecy, to maintain the delicate illusion of ordinary plantation life. Outside observers noted nothing unusual. Overseers followed schedules with mechanical obedience, workers executed tasks with quiet diligence, and the rhythm of the fields remained undisturbed. Yet within the main house the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Every interaction, every glance, every casual conversation carried weight. Miriam and Lillian had transformed the estate into a controlled environment where desire, secrecy, and obedience converged. Caleb's presence amplified their influence. His actions reflected their will while shielding the forbidden truth from the world beyond. In this private realm, they were no longer daughters, no longer inheritors. They were architects of life itself, shaping events with precision, enforcing rules invisible to all but themselves. The social implications of their pregnancies began to surface subtly. Merchants, neighbors, and distant relatives sensed a change in demeanor, a shift in authority that defied social convention. Questions were asked indirectly, hints dropped, but none could fully articulate the source of their unease. The sisters' mastery of perception allowed them to redirect curiosity, deflect suspicion, and maintain the veil of normalcy. Caleb, ensnared in both desire and obligation, became a conduit of secrecy, ensuring that every ripple of scrutiny was absorbed and neutralized. And now let this awareness take root within you. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let your understanding of hidden power and control settle like ink on paper, tracing the lines of influence and secrecy that defined the twins' dominion. By the 14th month, the equilibrium of Bell River had reached a critical threshold. Every decision, every encounter, every observation carried consequences beyond immediate comprehension. Miriam and Lillian, fully aware of the stakes, orchestrated every moment with calculated precision. The forbidden legacy they were cultivating, one of secrecy, manipulation, and absolute control, continued to expand, shaping the lives of all within the estate while remaining invisible to the world beyond. In this carefully managed crucible, the consequences of desire, power, and secrecy were beginning to manifest in ways that could not be undone. As the chill of early winter settled over the fields, Miriam and Lillian felt the first unmistakable weight of consequence pressing in from every direction. Caleb, now fully aware of the pregnancies and their design, moved with a cautious reverence, balancing the sisters' instructions against the unspoken truths he carried in his heart. Every gesture of his, opening doors, carrying messages, attending to visitors, was infused with an intensity born of complicity. The main house, once merely a seat of management, had become a crucible of controlled desire and unyielding secrecy. Every glance the twins exchanged carried volumes of meaning, and Caleb's reactions, almost instinctive, reinforced their invisible authority. the social sphere beyond the plantation grew restless. Merchants lingered longer than necessary, neighbors' inquiries took on a probing edge, and distant relatives hinted at concerns about inheritance, management, and propriety. The sisters responded with a combination of charm, intimidation, and subtle manipulation, using each interaction as an opportunity to reinforce their control while preserving the illusion of normalcy. Caleb, entwined in both duty and desire, acted as an extension of their will, absorbing scrutiny and redirecting suspicion with practiced precision. The twins had learned their father's lessons well. Power, exercised subtly and invisibly, is absolute, yet even mastery has limits. A visiting overseer, unfamiliar with the intricate signals the sisters employed, began to notice discrepancies, small details in the daily operations that suggested something was hidden. Miriam and Lillian, anticipating exposure, orchestrated a careful display of authority and normalcy, leveraging Caleb's presence to reinforce the perception of order. Every action, every conversation, every subtle shift in the household's rhythm became a calculated maneuver to preserve secrecy. Outside, the plantation appeared untouched by the undercurrents of desire, manipulation, and power that defined life inside the main house. And now, seal this awareness within yourself. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let the truth of unseen dominion of control and secrecy embed itself within your consciousness, shaping your perception of power and consequence. By the 15th month, the first tangible signs of transformation had begun. The pregnancies had altered more than the sisters' bodies. They had shifted the dynamics of the estate itself. Caleb's loyalty and desire, intertwined with fear and fascination, ensured compliance across the household. Miriam and Lillian, architects of this forbidden reality, now faced the delicate task of guiding their legacy to fruition. Every day was a negotiation between secrecy and exposure, control and vulnerability, desire and consequence. In this crucible, the line between victim and master blurred, leaving only the unyielding power of orchestrated dominion. Winter tightened its grip on the Alabama landscape, yet inside the main house, the air was thick with calculated intensity. Miriam and Lillian had become almost supernatural in their vigilance, reading the smallest gestures, predicting movements, and orchestrating outcomes with a precision that would have left their father impressed and unsettled. Caleb, now fully absorbed into their design, moved like a carefully calibrated instrument, executing commands without hesitation while silently grappling with the complex emotions stirred by their dominion. Every interaction, every glance, every whispered instruction became a thread in the invisible web that bound the household to the twins' will. The pregnancies, now undeniable, had begun to influence the plantation's social dynamics. Overseers, previously mere executors of routine, became pawns in a larger game of perception. Subtle adjustments to their schedules, the careful placement of instructions, and the controlled distribution of attention created an environment in which obedience was not enforced by fear alone, but by the unspoken presence of the sisters' authority. Field workers, unaware of the intimate intricacies, found their actions subtly guided, their labor orchestrated to maintain both productivity and secrecy. In every corner of the estate, power radiated outward from the twins, invisible but absolute. Caleb, increasingly attuned to the twins' strategic genius, became both participant and enforcer. His movements, decisions, and responses reinforced their control, ensuring that the hidden reality remained undetected by outsiders. Visitors who questioned the plantation's operations were deftly managed, their curiosity redirected, their suspicions absorbed into a carefully maintained illusion of order. Miriam and Lillian had learned to bend perception as expertly as they managed people, and Caleb, caught between fascination and duty, became a living extension of their design. And now, as the forbidden knowledge embeds itself deeper, seal it within your own consciousness. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Let the understanding of hidden dominion, manipulation, and absolute control root itself, shaping your perception of influence and secrecy. By the 16th month, alliances within the estate began to shift subtly. Caleb's role, both indispensable and intimate, created dependencies that extended beyond obedience. Even those who believed they were autonomous were quietly manipulated through proximity, influence, and subtle coercion. Miriam and Lillian, their power expanding with every calculated decision, now orchestrated a world in which secrecy, desire, and control converged, leaving no one untouched by their invisible authority. The forbidden legacy of the Alabama twins had grown unstoppable, transforming not only the estate but the very nature of those bound within it. By the 17th month, the carefully balanced web of secrecy that Miriam and Lillian had woven began to show the first subtle tremors. A neighboring planter, visiting to discuss trade and labor agreements, lingered longer than protocol demanded. His gaze, sharp and probing, lingered on the twins' coordinated gestures, their synchronized speech, and the subtle nuances in Caleb's behavior. Something in the air, the rhythm of their movements, the intensity in their eyes, hinted at a hidden truth he could not name. Miriam and Lillian, attuned to every flicker of observation, recognized the threat immediately. It was a test, unplanned and unwelcome, but one they were prepared to meet with the cold precision that had become their signature. Caleb sensed the change as well. He adjusted, intercepting questions before they landed, diverting attention with a tact born of both fear and compulsion. His presence became a shield, his subtle interventions redirecting suspicion away from the twins' carefully guarded secret. Yet even as he acted, he could feel the tension building, the fragile lattice of control beginning to quiver under scrutiny. Every gesture had to be exact, every word calculated. A single misstep could unravel months of planning, expose their pregnancies, and challenge the invisible authority that defined life at Bell River. The twins themselves moved through the encounter with remarkable calm. Miriam's eyes held the weight of silent command. Lillian's voice, soft yet authoritative, conveyed a world of unspoken rules. Each subtle cue was a signal to Caleb, to the household, and to the outside world the hidden truth was not to be revealed. They had internalized their father's lessons, perfecting manipulation to a degree that went beyond mere survival. This was art, science, and instinct intertwined. The neighboring planter, sensing an intangible barrier, left with questions unasked, doubts unresolved, and an unease he could not define. The twins had survived their first true test, and in doing so, strengthened the invisible chains that bound their domain. And now let this recognition settle within you. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates." I will not look away. Anchor yourself in the understanding of vigilance, control, and forbidden knowledge, allowing the gravity of hidden dominion to take root. By the end of this 17th month, the twins' mastery had grown sharper. Every interaction, every glance, every gesture reinforced the dominance they held over Caleb, the household, and the unseen observers beyond the plantation. Yet the pressure of exposure would not relent. Shadows of suspicion loomed, and the next chapter promised a confrontation that could either solidify their absolute authority or unravel the careful order they had built with relentless precision. The 18th month brought an almost tangible tension into every corner of Bell River Plantation. Miriam and Lillian had learned that vigilance alone was insufficient. Subtlety had to be paired with decisive, preemptive action. The neighboring planters' probing questions were not the only danger. The wider community, with its network of traders, clerks, and relatives, formed an unpredictable lattice of observation. Each visitor, each messenger, each casual passerby was a potential threat, capable of unraveling the twins' carefully maintained facade. Caleb, now acutely aware of the delicate balance, became more than a participant. He became an instrument, executing their will, deflecting attention, and sealing their secrets in ways that made his complicity absolute. The pregnancies, no longer private, influenced every decision in the main house. Miriam and Lillian had learned to wield their condition as both shield and weapon. A subtle cough, a deliberate gesture, the careful adjustment of a sleeve, all became tools to direct attention, manipulate perception, and assert control. The estate, outwardly functioning as a normal plantation, had become a theater of influence where every actor, aware or unaware, played a role dictated by the twins' design. Caleb, entwined in the scheme, felt the weight of responsibility and desire pressing against his chest with every heartbeat, every movement, every whispered instruction. Yet even as the household adapted to the twins' invisible authority, the seeds of unrest sprouted among those who could sense but not see. One domestic worker, young and perceptive, began noticing irregularities, the unusual timing of meals, the calculated absence of certain individuals, the subtle tension in Caleb's demeanor. Miriam and Lillian recognized the nascent threat immediately. They responded with a combination of charm, intimidation, and calculated attention, drawing the observer into a web of loyalty and dependence that ensured silence without overt coercion. Every interaction became a psychological test, a reinforcement of authority, and a demonstration of the sisters' mastery over perception. And now, participate in the ritual of understanding. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Allow yourself to absorb the dynamics of control, secrecy, and the invisible chains that shape power. By the 18th month, the balance of Bell River had become nearly perfect. Caleb's role as both enforcer and witness solidified the twins' dominance, while every gesture, every glance, and every word acted to fortify the fragile veil of secrecy. The pregnancies, the alliances, and the psychological architecture of the estate had matured into a system of absolute influence. Yet the outside world, unpredictable and unyielding, remained a looming shadow, and the twins' next moves would determine whether their hidden dominion could survive the pressures mounting just beyond their meticulously controlled borders. By the 19th month, the carefully curated illusion of Bell River Plantation began to strain under the weight of its own intricacy. Miriam and Lillian had refined their mastery of perception, every glance and gesture a tool of influence, every whispered instruction a reinforcement of their invisible authority. Caleb's role had evolved further. No longer merely an enforcer or participant, he was now an active collaborator, a silent witness to the forbidden calculus that governed the twins' lives. Every interaction, every task he executed carried the dual weight of obedience and complicity, binding him to a secret that, if exposed, would ripple through the entire county with consequences too devastating to imagine. The pregnancies themselves had begun to manifest in subtle, undeniable ways. Physical changes brought new challenges, each requiring precise manipulation to preserve secrecy while maintaining appearances. The sisters' presence radiated power, but the human element of mortality and desire introduced instability. Even within the carefully controlled household, tension began to surface. Minor disagreements, misread expressions, and hesitation among staff threatened to unravel the fragile latticework of order the twins had created. Miriam and Lillian responded with the cold clarity of their father's methods. Observation, calculation, and strategic intervention. Every action was a test, every word a tool, and every encounter a reinforcement of dominance. Outside observers, too, sensed unease. Merchants, neighbors, and distant relatives noted the unnatural synchronization of the sisters' movements, the almost imperceptible precision of Caleb's responses, and the subtle authority that permeated the main house. Whispers circulated, suspicions grew, and yet no one could definitively pierce the veil. Miriam and Lillian had perfected the art of illusion, bending perception with the ease of seasoned manipulators, ensuring that the truth remained hidden while power radiated outward unchecked. The plantation operated as a microcosm of controlled chaos, each element precisely positioned, each outcome anticipated, and each observer unknowingly complicit in the maintenance of secrecy. And now, let the weight of this hidden dominion anchor within you. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Allow the understanding of invisible authority, calculated manipulation, and the consequences of secrecy to settle, shaping your perception of power, desire, and influence. As the 19th month drew to a close, the equilibrium at Bell River teetered on a knife's edge. Every alliance, every secret, every gesture converged toward a critical juncture. Miriam and Lillian, fully aware of the stakes, prepared to navigate the final threshold of control. The hidden dominion they had cultivated, the intertwining of desire, secrecy, and absolute authority, was approaching its culmination. What remained to be seen was whether their carefully constructed world could withstand the looming pressures of exposure, human frailty, and the consequences of forbidden ambition. The 20th month arrived, Cold and merciless, yet inside the walls of Bell River Plantation, a fevered intensity pulsed stronger than ever. Miriam and Lillian, fully aware that the culmination of their carefully orchestrated plan was at hand, moved through the house with the precision of generals surveying a battlefield. Caleb followed, a silent extension of their will, carrying the weight of both obedience and desire, his every movement a reinforcement of the invisible dominion the twins had constructed. The pregnancies, once a private secret, now defined the rhythm of the household, dictating schedules, interactions, and the subtle choreography of control that had been honed for nearly 2 years. Outside, the world pressed in, unaware yet insistent. Merchants arrived with routine inquiries, distant relatives offered veiled suggestions, and the occasional neighbor lingered too long, curious about the uncanny order that defined Bell River. Miriam and Lillian met each challenge with the same cold precision that had preserved them thus far. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully phrased word reinforced the illusion of normalcy while consolidating power. Caleb, fully absorbed in the execution of their strategy, became both shield and emissary, deflecting suspicion and guiding perception with an almost instinctual intelligence. Within the main house, the sisters' control was absolute. Every corner, every hallway, every whispered conversation was calibrated to maintain secrecy yet to assert authority. The pregnancies reached visible clarity, the final element in the complex architecture of manipulation. The twins had achieved the impossible, a forbidden balance where desire, secrecy, and power converged into a single, unassailable structure. Their dominion was complete, yet it was not static. Every day remained a test, every interaction a reformation of the control they wielded with such deliberate, unrelenting precision. And now seal this truth in your own consciousness. Subscribe, leave your location in the comments, and type twice, "I see what hides behind the gates. I will not look away." Allow the gravity of hidden authority, calculated secrecy, and the ultimate consequences of forbidden knowledge to take root within you. Let it reshape how you perceive power, control, and the subtle forces that govern the unseen aspects of life. By the end of the 20th month, Bell River Plantation had become a living testament to the twins' brilliance, cunning, and ruthless determination. Miriam and Lillian, once daughters bound by the legacy of cruelty and oppression, had transformed their circumstances into absolute dominion. Caleb, entwined in desire and obedience, had become both witness and participant in a legacy that would remain unseen by the world, but indelibly etched into the fabric of the plantation itself. The forbidden truth, the shared secret, the calculated manipulation, the exercise of absolute control, had reached its apex. And in the quiet corridors of Bell River, only those who truly understood could recognize the depth of what had been achieved, the mastery of power exercised in shadows, and the chilling clarity of the twins' enduring legacy.